So good morning. Thank you for coming today. I'm Tom. I'm the CISO for Clarinet. New to this role, but primarily I've been doing defensive inside of Clarinet for 4 years. I've been doing defensive security now for about 15 years in total. I've got Luke today with me, and we're here to talk about ransomware in general. Obviously, it's been in the news quite a lot recently, as everyone is aware. But what we wanted to talk about was just what's happening out there. Why is it happening out there? What you can do to take some of this back internally, what you can do to take some of this back inside your organizations, and give you a bit of an overview about how we see the world. Because you see the world in your organization as a whole. I see the world as my organization as a whole, but my organization actually is across quite a lot. So I wanted to start this off because I'd completely forgotten about this. And it's come up to light after we were talking about it yesterday. But TFL, this was 2024. This was due to staff to get back in the building. And I completely glossed over this and I completely forgot about this. And you think, well, okay, well, you know, that's cool, that's neat. Yeah, scattered spider. It was a bunch of teens that called up their service desk and crippled the TFL. That attack happened over a year and a half ago. The recovery of that incident is still ongoing. It is still not finished. And that was a long time ago and is still having repercussions to this day. 17-year-old from Warsaw was arrested for that attack. Echoing the point that I want to make later, but these are not sophisticated gangs out of Eastern Europe. This is a 17-year-old from Warsaw that caused damage that is still ongoing to the biggest infrastructure in London. Still have problems with this incident to today. Here's a list of companies in the UK that have had cyber attacks over the past year. I tried to go through the list last week. We're at about 1,400 companies in 2 years that have been attacked and ransomware. There was 5 yesterday that were published on ransomware sites. These are just big companies in the UK, name brand companies, heritage companies in some cases, that have been compromised over the past time. We've had experience with some of these incidents. I myself and Luke have had experience with dealing some of these incidents. There's a lot of commonality between a lot of these incidents, but what I get from this are these are big companies. Mm-hmm. These are companies that invest a lot of money in their cybersecurity posture. These are companies that spend a lot of time obsessing over cybersecurity, yet we still look on here. British Library, still that incident is ongoing.
Still encrypted.
Still a lot of data encrypted in that case. NHS, we all saw what happened there. Inmarsat, Harrods. Quite lucky that none of my personal data has been taken from Harrods, I think. That's probably an easier thing. Co-op, okay, it took 3 months for me moving into my new house for my now new address to be leaked on the internet. That's probably a record. It's not a record I'm particularly happy with. M&S, Guardian, Asda, all of these people have had significant cyber attacks over the past year.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, just go back to the slide.
Yep.
Another thing that's really interesting about these logos is common themes. So we mentioned TFL on the first slide, British Airways, the travel, national infrastructure tie into NHS, retail, obviously, Asda, Co-op, Harrods, M&S. This one here, I actually worked on this incident, and I think what was really interesting about that one is that one was RA World. That was the group that hit them. But that really kind of kickstarted the theme of ESXi level encryption. Trying to do any incident response, and we're going to talk on kind of planning and what you can do afterwards, but trying to do any incident response when it's vSphere level encryption is a nightmare because there's nothing left. It's really hard to pull anything back. So you end up skirting around the edges and trying to follow breadcrumbs that kind of stop and start as you go and pick them back up again. But common themes are recurring, and we've got a bit of a saying in incident response, which is 2's potentially a coincidence, but 3 is always a pattern. And we can see from the logos exactly what those patterns are. Threat landscape. I'm not going to read all these out to you. I'm sure you can read those. The screen's big enough. but record-breaking attack volumes in 2024. There was a stat that I was reading last week that was by 2031, there'll be a ransomware attack every 2 seconds. It's how we respond to those that is more important now. Soaring ransom demands, the bills are getting higher. Does anybody know when the first ransomware incident was, out of interest? It was 89, Dr. Pop with Cyborg virus, and it targeted the AIDS conference, but that was on a floppy disk. And his demand, was $189, which he had to post to a PO box in Panama. So recovery, it was always going to take weeks and weeks and weeks. But we talk about ransomware as if it's something new, and it's definitely not new. I think when we look at those attacks from the 80s, from the 90s, why is it becoming more and more prevalent today? Access. So we've gone from floppy disks, the vectors changed, we've gone to CDs. CDs have changed, we've gone to USB sticks. Who uses USB sticks now? Everything's digital transfer. So you don't have to have something that you physically put into a machine. They just, tap off of connectivity. Insurance premiums. It's a bit of a dubious one because cyber insurance is more accessible now than it was, say, 3 years ago. But the premiums on the rise and the requirements to qualify for a policy is also more strict. And then recovery times. This one's interesting again because prior to 2024, the downtime was actually decreasing. We were seeing people getting faster at recovering, utilizing better backups, having air-gapped backups and things like that. But it's on the way back up again now. So they're getting better and better and better. And we're seeing that with things like double extortion, multi-extortion techniques, which we'll go on to again.
And I think as well, with the dwell time and talking about those double extortion techniques, it was your original ransomware just ransomware the stuff and you had to pay Bitcoin and that was it. And then all of a sudden people got very good at doing backups. So then they were like, oh, I don't care, I've got a backup, I'm just going to restore. And then the attackers are like, well, okay, what am I going to do next? So then they started DDoSing people. They're like, now you can't get on the internet. And then they're like, cool, WAF, firewall. And then it was like, right, well, we're going to steal your data then. And then they sell it. And then that's where we're at now. We're at this world where now they're going to do that. Then they were taking out things like Google ads. So if you wanted to hide that you've been hacked, the hackers were buying Google ads for your company to say, don't trust this organization, they've been hacked, come here. They would email customers, they'd email people, they'd VoIP bomb you, they'd phone call you. Like, these are the world that we started to go from. And it's this iteration. They attacked, we got better at defending. So then they attacked in a different way, that we got better at defending. It's constant cat and mouse, cat and mouse, cat and mouse, which I think is why you see that decrease in the time it takes to respond to these incidents. Now all of a sudden it's going back up again because they're doing other weird things. They never used to go after ESXi. Now they are going after ESXi. So then the idea of that is, well, you move away from ESXi and you go to cloud. And then you start seeing now people using native tooling inside of AWS to encrypt S3 buckets. Mm-hmm. But they're doing it with their own encryption key. So they're using the AWS platform as it's intended to be, just swapping out the encryption key, and then all of a sudden you're locked out your data. So this is the next iteration of that cycle. We're seeing this go and go and go, move and move and move as people respond and people learn. So apologies if I'm teaching everyone to suck eggs a little bit, but I do find it interesting when I talk about ransomware and I talk about these gangs that actually there is a misconception about what these things actually are and what these people are. Dragon Force is obviously the ones that have done attacks recently. Dragon Force don't actually hack anyone. Lockbit don't really hack anyone. These big ransomware gangs, they're not the hackers. They're the vendor, effectively. They make the software, they do the hosting, they make a portal, they do some of that, but they don't actually do any of the hacking. It's the affiliates that do the hacking. The affiliates are the ones that are taking the risk. So in this case, Scattered Spider is the affiliate. Dragon Force is the RAS, the ransomware as a service. When I presented this to the salespeople, I tried to put it in the case of, well, look, you think of it in your world. You're going to go and work for whoever gives you the best commission. That is what affiliates will do. They're not very loyal. Scattered Spider has worked with Alpha V, Clop, and Dragon Force. They will work to whoever pays them the most. The affiliate's the one that takes the risk. The affiliate is the one that gets the lion's share of any ransom that's been paid. The ransomware software provider effectively just takes, in some cases, 30% of the ransom. the affiliate gets 70% of the ransom. So when you look at this stuff and you go, well, okay, it's these people that are taking the risk, but it's the name brand ones that make all of this news. But actually, they're not the ones doing any of this stuff. It is these small collective groups. When Lockbit got owned by NCSC and the FBI and the conglomerate, there was a father and son team that were one of the affiliates for Lockbit. And you start to look at these things and go, okay, right, these are not just sort of, it's just little cottage industries that have popped up. These are consultants. I think Lockbit decided to call it post-paid penetration testing, is what they called their ransomware service. And you sort of look at that and you go, that's cool, I'm going to steal that. But this is what they are. So there are two elements to this, and there's always two elements to this. And a lot of these people are just effectively, they will work for the highest bidder. There are no loyalties outside of a few small cases. Evil Corp was one that only exclusively worked with Lockbit, but as that unraveled and you saw the messages go back, you found out why they were so ingrained with Lockbit, and actually they were doing some shady stuff. The other bit, ransomware is a business. They do actually have HR teams. They do have payroll, because a ransomware as a service provider is entirely dependent on their reputation. If their reputation is they don't pay their affiliates, they will quickly be forgotten, not used, and they will die in obscurity. Lockbit had this. Lockbit Sup, he was accused of not paying out to his affiliates. So they went on a forum and they had an arbitrage, and they had a meeting in the forum, and everyone put their cards out on the table and they decided whether or not someone had or had not been paid. In that case, the affiliate was judged to have not been paid, so they paid him out. This all happens on shady Russian forums like XSS, but it happens out there. Like, these are people that have to negotiate the same problems that we have to negotiate. For some reason, I've ended up in some very weird Telegram channels because I collect Telegram API keys for a hobby. There's another blog that's going to come out about that eventually, so you can read it when it comes out. But I collect Telegram API keys for a hobby because people put them in weird places on the internet. And I can read some of their messages, and you read some messages. There's an Albanian crime gang that I'm currently reading at the moment. They constantly moan about their AWS bill, that it's too high, that someone left on this phishing service that they wanted for the weekend, and now their AWS budget is blown out. Like, these are the same problems that we have, right? But they're doing it because, you know, the stolen credit card that they bought their AWS account on is now going to get noticed because they maxed out their budget. They all have the same problems because it's a business. This is not just some sort of weird internet thing. This is, I think it was, if you took all of cybersecurity over the next 5 years, they're going to have the GDP of a small country. Mm-hmm. That's a significant thing to have to deal with now. And if they're not structured, then they fall into obscurity. So they have HR, they have payroll, they have support desks. They are effectively a cybercrime version of us.
Mm-hmm. Our sales teams do have loyalties, though.
Our sales team do have loyalties, though. To everyone who's sat in this room, there are loyalties here. So Scatter Spider, I wanted to pull this out to drive home some of these points, because again, when people think ransomware, you think Russia, you think Eastern Europe, you think Vietnam, you think not UK based. These guys are American, these guys are British. 17-year-old from Warsaw, there's a 14-year-old from Kansas that was arrested as part of this gang. Okay, they are teens, they are young, but they're a generation that grew up in cybersecurity. They're a generation that grew up with the barrier to entry being whether or not you do or do not have morals. That is the barrier to entry to cybersecurity for kids these days. They are extremely good at social engineering. Again, they've been brought up in this world. They've been brought up having to deal with all of these different systems and interacting with these different systems. There's a really good one, it was a Darknet Diaries one about Xbox Underground, which again, if you're into your cybersecurity law, is a really interesting period of time where people were breaking into Xbox systems to steal games and all of this stuff. All of this was done through social engineering. All of this stuff was done by just calling up people and getting some details and getting some more information. And it was all done by teens because they know about this stuff. They can get into this stuff and they can do this very quickly. Yes, you have older senior people that are very adept at bypassing different technologies, but the youth are very good at doing this. And people don't expect to have someone with a British accent calling them up and being like, hey, I'm going to do this. You know, you looked at MGM Grand, who was done by Scatter Spider you think that they would have very good verifications if someone was calling up pretending to be Bob and they all of a sudden sounded like they were from Moscow. Some red flags are going to happen. But if it's a 16-year-old from Kansas, maybe this goes through. Once they're inside, they will move, they will shift, they will blend in as much as possible. The news article that came out yesterday from the BBC, which I do have slight disagreement with because the main source of reporting to this BBC News article was Dragonforce. They're now just ringing the BBC and telling them all of the stories, which I think it doesn't leave a particularly nice taste in my mouth when you think about it. But they were moaning to the BBC because Co-op unplugged all their systems. So Co-op didn't actually get ransomware, as it turns out, or at least so far what we know. But Dragonforce were moaning to the BBC and saying, well, they've taken down their systems, they've tanked their share price. Co-op doesn't actually publicly trade, so shows a lack of understanding there. And they were moaning about this stuff, and they're complaining that the Co-op has done all this reputational damage to themselves. And you sort of look at it and go, well, yeah, you're moaning because you didn't do it. You're the one that didn't cause the reputational damage because you didn't encrypt their files and you didn't do all of this stuff. But again, it's this idea that they can be there, that they've sat inside this network. They say they were inside for 2 weeks. That I can believe. The timings of all of these attacks that just happened recently, it is not coincidence. These happened at Easter. These happened at Easter for a very particular reason. It's the busiest trading period. If you look back to the Scottish Environmental Agency that was hacked a couple of years ago and ransomware, Christmas Eve. Not a coincidence that these things happen at these times. They know about these things. They've sat in that network. They've waited in that network to push the button, metaphorically, to ransomware these systems. They know about these things. They're aware of these things. This is not just opportunistic. They're sitting there, they're waiting. So the past victims, I said, we had casinos in America. My best tidbit about a pen test in a casino was one casino was actually broken into by the fish tank, which again, you think it's a casino, surely it has the best thing in the world. The fish tank had a thermostat in it. The thermostat was an IoT thermostat. So the pen testers broke the thermostat, made it back into the corporate network, went across the network and compromised the system. So you can actually hack a casino from a fish tank. But I mean, like I said to a couple of you before, these people have unlimited money, quite literally unlimited money. If they want new cybersecurity budget, they just turn a dial on a slot machine and it magically appears. Like there is nothing that they can't do to get these things. So the timeline, again, not coincidental that these things happened on these times, but there are interesting bits here. So reports have come out that says NTDIS file was stolen in February. Okay, it's not a massive thing, but it's a key indicator in this. They didn't report that, it came out after the fact. But then you start to look and say, well, if credentials were stolen in February and the attack then happened in April, well, what happened? They have a SOC, what was going on inside the system. And then you start to, as things unfold, and Luke talked about ESXi being a thing, you can start to make assumptions about based off of different systems. Vast majority of the time, the underlying operating system in an ESXi box isn't monitored. You monitor the top layer. You don't actually monitor what's underneath. It's the same for things like firewalls. How many times do I look at firewalls as like a FortiGate virtual appliance? Well, I take a log from the FortiGate, but I can't even get to the underlying operating system to take a log from that. But when a 0-day happens, they just go through, they go on that virtual machine and they do what they want because it's an operating system. Same with ESXi. ESXi is trivial. Once you get root access onto an ESXi box, you just dump the domain controller's virtual image. Ta-da! You've got everything. You've got all of the files. You've got everything you need to dump NTDIS directly from a virtual machine image. And you can do that almost silently in a lot of cases. Yes, you need to get through. Yeah, you'll probably need a good exploit or very lucky with some misauthentication on an ESXi box. But it's trivial to do that.
A lot of the time they duplicate it so that they're not actually doing it on the one that you see. They're doing it on a separate one, and that's why you don't get the logs.
So again, as we go through, there's other little things that I find particularly interesting. So 21st of April, that was when stuff in stores started to break. The anecdote from Rob, who's our head of sales engineering, was he was actually in an M&S shop when this happened. he was told, sorry, our card systems are down, pay on the app. His now gripe is, I was told to pay on the app. I think I've just given my entire details to the attackers as this was going on, but whatever.
Couldn't get
The Wi-Fi one is an interesting bit, because then in-store Wi-Fi didn't work. And you go, well, okay, well, that's whatever, some routing happened. But then if you think about it, you go, well, your Wi-Fi is connected to some sort of controller. That controller is probably connected to some sort of authentication server. So if the Wi-Fi is down, is the authentication server down? If the authentication server is down, why would ever the authentication server be down? That's the most critical part of any network, any system. So you can start to sort of pick little things out. That was the bit that caught my interest when they said, our payment control system is down. I'm like, cool, Wi-Fi's probably, internet's down or something. Oh no, Wi-Fi's down. Oh, okay. That's interesting. So we go through this. Again, dates are knotting. These are all the same things. So we start to see these problems compound and compound and compound and compound. And again, there's an investment here in technology. I know people that work for their SOC. I have ex-colleagues that work for their SOC. I know those people. I know how hard they work. I know what they do, and I know how vigilant they are. But these problems just compound and compound and compound and compound. Then you start to see the theft of data. You start to see these systems go out the door. You then see attackers being more brazen because it's becoming obvious that they're not going to get a ransom paid. So now they're just out here, in the case of Marks & Spencer's, manipulating stock. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to get paid a ransom, but you're going to breach that company, we'll just short their stock then. It's insider trading, but they're criminals. What do they care? They can just get some easy money to go out of this.
I think the other thing as well that was interesting on that last slide was the last bullet, the last event was the 1st of May. There's not been very much released in the last 2 weeks about either of the Marks & Spencer's and the Coop attack. But yeah, if you go to your Coop, they're still scanning stock in every day. There's still no stock on the shelves. So it's the lasting impact of that. And going on to the next slide is all around impacts. Again, not going to read these out to you, but reputational damage. Reputational damage to the public is actually an interesting point, because it's more accepted now that people you work with, companies you work with, suppliers, customers are going to get ransomware at some point. So there's less of the kind of reaction to, should we be working with these guys? Do we need to look at what they're doing and how they're doing things? Because it's just almost accepted now that it's going to happen to somebody that you work with at some point. But when you look at the costs of that and recovery, the ripple effect is massive. So Marks & Spencer's, the first slide with all the logos on, you noticed another common theme is a lot of those are publicly traded. Marks & Spencer's took a 6.5% share price drop. They actually bounced back quite quickly, about a week before they were somewhere there or thereabouts. But Ocado, who do all the Marks & Spencer's delivery, they took a 10.5% hit. They weren't even part of the ransomware. So it's the ripple effect of not just them. How do we monitor and protect our supply chain? How do we make sure that we're not a victim through osmosis? And then the rest is quite straightforward, really. So the estimated loss of revenue, we'd expect somebody at Marks & Spencer's to be at about 15 million a week. The turnover about 11 billion a year. I didn't quite realise how big they were until we started looking into it. But the remediation bills, it's all the stuff that when you take out a cyber insurance policy, yes, you can factor in certain things, but a lot of it just can't be factored in. So they're not going to cover it. And when you look at the payouts, so again, another impact that's not on there, cyber insurance payouts for enterprise scale businesses is about 60% of the total cost. So there's still a 40% hit that you're having to front the bill for. Challenges.
So I wanted to go through the social engineering side. It is notoriously hard to detect because effectively, I did a whole presentation on this last year about social engineering, and with some of our pen testers and some of our red teamers, it is really hard from a logging point of view to detect unless you go really sort of, I used it at the time, it's probably not apt now, but a bit Elon Musk, and tap someone's brain. I don't know what is going on inside that user. I don't know if they are being tricked into doing something that they don't know, because I can't take a log from them. I'm not going to listen to every single phone call that ever goes through to try and detect this, nor should the SOC. So it's hard to detect this stuff, but there are ways to do it. User behavior analytics is one that is critical to this, trying to see deviations from someone's normal behavior. As we go to new systems, we go to sort of more powerful systems, machine learning, quote unquote AI, these things become a lot easier because we can take all these massive data sets and we can condense them down into singular points and try and map out a user journey, try and map out someone who's doing user stuff. 2FA, zero trust, passwordless. These make things harder. If you don't have a password, then it's a lot harder for someone to steal a password. But again, I've talked to some of you guys, some of these things are great in security world, but then we constantly come up against these barriers of, yeah, but that's going to add like another minute onto someone's user journey, or that's going to add 2 minutes onto a process inside a help desk. We can't possibly inconvenience a user. And you go, well, I'd rather inconvenience a user for 2 minutes than inconvenience the business for 4 months. So yes, these are challenges. Yes, these are persistent ones. And it's about our roles as senior cybersecurity people inside of companies is to educate them. I am not immune to these problems inside of Clarinet. We have these conversations all the time about, we want to introduce this, we want to do this. Oh, yes, but that's going to add more wait time here. That's going to add a process here. That's going to add an extra hump here. But we have to educate these things. We can't just constantly keep waiting for the next co-op, Harrods, Marks and Spencer's, British Airways, whoever, to happen. Okay, right. Unfortunately, right now, we're all in a period of boom, of everyone is interested in what we say. Everyone wants to know what we say. And all of a sudden, everyone thinks that patching is critically important. Okay, we've been talking about that for the past 30 years, but I'll take a win when I'll take a win. EDR, MDR gives you the visibility. It gives you the ideas. It gives you the view of your estate. But again, building a strong culture internally is critical to a lot of this stuff. If you have a culture of fear internally inside of a company, that just breeds people hiding things away. Like, oh God, I clicked a phishing link. I'm not going to tell anyone because I'm going to get told off. I'm open and honest. I got phished. We do internal phishing. I clicked the link. Just so happened that I'd swapped reporting managers at the time and I got a new thing going, hey, can you click this link to open this file? Bang, there's my know before phishing page. And I'm like, damn you, Don. I hate you now. But like, I've done it, right? I've been phished. Like, there are some phishing emails that I've seen come through the SOC that have taken me half an hour to work out whether or not it is or is not a phishing email. And I spend a lot of time looking at these things and going through these things. If it's taking me that long to understand that this is a phishing email, that this is trying to convince someone, what hope do I have for someone else that they're going to be able to pick this stuff out? I do it professionally. They do it because I'm telling them to be vigilant. But what we do is breed a culture to say, it's not a problem if you click on these links. Tell us that you've done it because then we can remediate these actions. We can help protect you. We can put in the systems. We can put in the places to go. I've worked on incidents before where users have buried their heads in the sand, clicked a simple phishing link, and it went through 4 escalations in HR before they ultimately ended up getting sacked because they just kept going, nope, 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 I didn't do it. And then you prove to them that they did, and they go, nope, that wasn't me. And then you prove that that device was in that location. Nope, 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 wasn't me. And then I prove with the geo coordinates that that laptop was in that place and it was in her kitchen. Nope, 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 wasn't me. Gone. She did sensitive work. That company worked on very sensitive information. If all she'd done is to say, yeah, sorry, that was me. Slap on the wrist, scare, call, hiss and train, and go on with your life. But we have to breed this culture because if people are hiding things and they're scared to say, oh, actually, I find that a bit weird. We have our pen testers that go in and they professionally just walk around buildings for a living. Question that the guy over there is looking at a printer. I mean, I can't remember the last time I used a printer, but whatever. I always question when someone goes over to a printer, starts unplugging stuff and plugging stuff in. But if you don't have that culture, then how are you going to spot these things?
And the biggest, so out of the box tooling is easy, but easy to put in, easy to get past and take out. The biggest defenses to everything that we've just spoken about for the last half an hour is the people, the policies and processes, because the technology can give you the visibility. The passwordless makes it harder for them to do what they're trying to do, but it comes down to the leadership. It comes down to that exact level of when we get hit, and it is a when, we talk about planning for the worst and hoping for the best. It should be expect the worst and hope for the best, because the worst will happen at some point, and we've got to make sure that when it does, we're mitigating all of the risks that come along with that. So I suppose the key takeaway there is, does the exec team understand what their role is when it comes to cyber and incident response? Because often they just say, well, we've got an IT team, we've got a blue team, we've got the security guys, that's their job. It's hard to be the sword and the shield. The blue team are just the shield, effectively. The sharp edge has got to come from above.
So, remediation stuff. Don't just implement MFA. It used to be something. Trivially, it'll take you 10 minutes to set up some infrastructure that will instantly bypass MFA these days. Don't do it. Do it. By all means, implement MFA, but don't just rely on it as this silver bullet that's going to solve all of these things. You can swap SIM cards. You can trick users into doing things. MFA is not the be-all and end-all. Again, we talk about how the ransomware has evolved and all of these things. Well, MFA was a reaction to people getting phished. Now, people have found a way past MFA. So don't really just implement MFA. Actual real things. So FIDO keys, passphrases. These are real, tangible, physical things that people have that can help them secure their network. Passwordless authentication, particularly stuff that is bound to devices. It is a lot harder to physically steal someone's laptop than it is to steal a password. If everything authentication is bound to that one device, then there is nothing to steal except the device. Regular training, again, build a culture. This is what I constantly talk to people. Don't build a culture of distrust. Build a culture of trust. We in cybersecurity, I love talking about cybersecurity. I don't know whether you've noticed that. But I will happily, and I say this to everyone, I'm going to our other office in Gloucester straight after this to give another set of talks. The primary point of that is, come talk to me. I'd rather spend 5 minutes telling you why it's not a problem than spend 5 months telling you why you should have talked to me about that problem. Continuous testing. Again, shamelessly, we have that service, but continuously test things, continuously find things, test things, probe things, go after things. Like, to me, the old pen test is dead. Why are you testing things once a year? Because, all it takes is for a 0 day to be released the next day after you've done your pen test for you not to pick it up for another year. Constantly start testing things, do things in iterative cycles, check that bit, then that bit, then that bit.
That process starts with identification as well. So it's not just the scope that's given to us. That's one of the big problems that we have is we've been doing pen testing for 20 odd years, but when we test things for customers and then they come back to us and say, well, hang on a minute, 3 weeks after you did the pen test, we got hit. It's like, yeah, on a completely different attack vector on something we didn't even know you had. You hadn't included it in scope. We didn't even know it was there. If you're not identifying assets, if you can't have a single source of truth as to what you own and where it is, the old school world of pen testing is redundant. And that's why the continuous approach needs to be done.
And again, the bottom part of this, like Luke said, you can't really prepare for a lot of these things. You just expect that this is going to happen and you hope for the best. But drilling all of this stuff in to not only teams below us, technical teams, but also to that C level, to that board level. Because ultimately, during an incident, it's their responsibility. They're the ones that have to make actions. We've gone through exercises before and incidents before where a key decision maker just happened to be on a boat somewhere. And all of a sudden, that entire incident ground to a halt for 4 hours because no one had thought, what happens if that person is not available? It hadn't gone through the cycle. It hadn't been tested. So you can have all of the best incident response processes in the world on paper. If you've not tested them in real life, then you don't have them. It's what we used to say about backups years ago. Oh, cool, I've got a backup on a drive. Well, have you tested it? Because until you test it, you have no backup. Because you never tested it. So you don't know if you need it at that one point in time, you're going to be able to recover that data, you're going to be able to do that. It's now the same in the cyber world. We need to test these processes and we need to get the engagement and the buy-in from the people above to the board, to the C-suite to say, these are the problems we have. We need you to test these. Here's how we're going to do it and regularly drill those through. Again, Scottish Environmental Agency, and I'll leave on this one. Really good incident response plan. Thorough incident response plan that have been tried and tested and drilled through. was on a server that was encrypted by the ransomware. So they had nothing. They couldn't get their files to tell them what to do in the incident because it was inside the incident, and that was a problem. But they'd never thought about that situation. They hadn't gone through that as part of a drill. And those are things that I really want to take away from this is not only do we need to test our infrastructure, we need to test our people and our processes. That is absolutely critical these days because having this as second nature, being able to just know exactly who to call, when to call, where to call at any point, at any time, at any day, and having multiple layers of people who can make those decisions, that is now critical because these incidents are getting quicker and quicker and quicker and more disruptive. Questions?
Yes.
So presumably most of these attacks kicked off with social engineering against the help desk. So I was wondering what you consider to be best practice in terms of authenticate password, whatever they reset from remote users.
So it is entirely what works for your business, and that's where it needs to be personal. It needs to be what works for your company. Example, our service desk, we use passwords and two factors that are built into people's profiles. So we have a challenge and response to go through those. I've talked to some of you guys, and there's different ways that people have done it through number authentications. Microsoft Authenticator can do this, so you can set up a system to authenticate someone using Microsoft Authenticator. And again, you then look at things like passwords, passwordless, hardware keys, bound devices, things like that. But it really is what is personal to your organization, but using something that can only be verified by that user, whether that is a passphrase, whether that is a known secret or an unknown secret, whatever. It's about looking and being in your user base and understanding what their capability is, the breadth of that capability as well. You know, if you're a retail organization that has 17,000 employees, that system is going to be completely different to someone else's. I'll make sure this comes out after, but there was a really good podcast that I listened to from Microsoft recently it was about Entra ID and managing it at scale, but it was between Microsoft and McDonald's. McDonald's has 2 million users in their Active Directory. So they have this significant problem about how do they do it? And they go into detail about how they do it, how they do this authentication and how they do it, because they'd love to go hardware keys and passes, but these cost like $5, $2 per person. So $5, $2 per person times 2 million. That's a significant amount. Okay, it's more cheeseburgers they need to sell, but it's a problem. So it's finding something that works for your organization. Second factors, passphrases, look into things that are already on people's devices like Authenticator.
It's the process as well of training those IT guys, you know, the service desk guys, knowing to implement a process once they hear key things. So password resets should always make them suspicious. You know, we see it all the time. We'll give you an extreme example. Following these retail attacks, we've got a retail customer that came to us the other day and said, my CEO has just mandated that all password resets have to come from an in-person request. So if you need your password reset, and they've physically got to come into the office and stand in front of us and say, please, can you reset my password? You know, it's extreme. It doesn't work for everybody. It doesn't work for every business. Certainly wouldn't work for McDonald's.
Certainly wouldn't work for McDonald's.
Any others?
You mentioned the end-to-end desktop bit was stolen, but is there any information around how that happened? Because that's on the inside. The attack sort of had everybody
Yeah. So,
served as well.
I mean, you're going to need root access to a lot of these systems, or domain access. So that is what has come out. No one has quite come out with the bit that happened before that. It was just, by the way, there was an incident in February, they stole the Active Directory database. So we don't know how they got that, but you're either going to need, in the case of dumping it from ESXi, root access to that box, or you're going to need some sort of domain admin credentials. That bit hasn't quite come out yet. But again, it does echo this point of something happened in there that led to the theft of effectively the crown jewels, and then subsequently something happened in April. You can draw a dotted line between the two of them. Quite how that happened before, I think will come out eventually. I'm surprised it hasn't already.
Any more questions? No?
Well, brilliant. Cool. thank you for coming.